You're a fool, Ben. Helping strangers won't get you anywhere, his father had grumbled once. A weathered rancher who spent his life taming desert dust and dreams, never guessing a roadside rescue would shift his horizon. 30 minutes past noon, he offered Arthur, a stranded elder, refuge from the merciless sun, driving him toward a naval destiny through wildfire-rerouted roads. Days later, naval patrol boats shadowed his truck, their hulls slicing the silence with intent. Life was about to turn in the most suspenseful way. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Narrative Whispers. Today, I'm going to share another heartwarming story. So let's dive into it. The merciless sun beat down on the cracked asphalt of Highway 47, creating rippling heat waves that distorted the distant horizon. Ben Carter squinted through his dusty windshield, his calloused hand gripping the worn steering wheel of his pickup truck. The air conditioning had given up hours ago, leaving him at the mercy of the desert heat that seeped through every crack and crevice of the old vehicle. This stretch of road was particularly lonely, cutting through miles of barren landscape, with only the occasional sagebrush and cactus breaking the monotony. As he rounded a gentle curve, something unusual caught his eye. A figure standing beside a car pulled over on the shoulder, an arm raised in a desperate plea for help. Ben slowed his truck, caution mixing with concern. Out here, so far from civilization, people looked out for one another. It was an unwritten rule of desert living. The figure wavered in the heat, an elderly man in a light button-down shirt that flapped gently against his thin frame. "Need a hand?" Ben called out, stepping from his truck. The blast of heat hit him like a physical force, and he instinctively reached for his worn cowboy hat, adjusting it lower over his sun-weathered face. The elderly man turned, relief washing over his features. His skin was reddened from sun exposure, and sweat stained the collar of his once crisp shirt. "Thank heavens," the man replied, his voice steady despite his obvious distress. "Been out here nearly an hour. Name's Arthur Hayes. Car just stopped working, made an awful noise and then nothing." He gestured helplessly at the open hood of his sedan, where tendrils of steam still escaped from the overheated engine. Ben nodded, wiping his brow with a bandana he pulled from his back pocket. "Ben Carter. Let me take a look." He moved toward the vehicle, feeling the heat radiating off the engine even before he reached it. One glance told him all he needed to know. The radiator had cracked, likely from the extreme temperature, and coolant had leaked all over the engine block. "Won't be an easy fix," he said, shaking his head. "Radiator's shot. You'd need a tow and some parts that aren't easy to come by out here." Arthur's shoulders slumped slightly at the news, but he maintained a dignified posture. "I was afraid it might be serious. I have to get to Port Angeles Naval Shipyard by tomorrow afternoon. It's important. My daughter's promotion ceremony." The pride in his voice was unmistakable even through his concern. Ben leaned against the sun-heated metal of the car, considering their options. The nearest town with a decent mechanic was at least 60 miles back, and with road closures due to wildfire risks further north, the detour would be substantial. He glanced at his watch, then back at Arthur, who had begun to look more vulnerable in the punishing heat. "Listen," Ben decided, "my ranch is about 20 minutes from here. Got plenty of water, a spare room, and a landline if you need to make calls. We can figure out next steps once you're out of this heat." The offer was spontaneous but sincere. Something about the older man's dignified demeanor and desperate situation stirred Ben's natural inclination to help. Gratitude flooded Arthur's face. "That's incredibly kind of you, Mr. Carter. I don't want to impose, but I'd be most appreciative." He extended a hand, and Ben noticed the subtle tremor in it. The heat was taking its toll. "No imposition at all," Ben assured him, reaching for Arthur's small suitcase in the back seat. "Let's get your essentials and head out. We can arrange for someone to pick up your car tomorrow." He helped Arthur into the passenger seat of his pickup, cranked the windows down for whatever breeze they could catch, and set off toward his property, leaving the abandoned sedan as a lonely marker on the desolate highway. The dirt road to Ben's ranch kicked up clouds of dust behind the truck as they approached the modest homestead. A single-story ranch house with a wide porch sat nestled against a backdrop of distant mesas, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid, built by Ben's father decades ago and maintained with careful attention through years of harsh weather and economic uncertainty. "Beautiful country," Arthur commented as they pulled up to the house, his eyes scanning the rugged landscape with genuine appreciation. Harsh, but beautiful in its own way. Ben cut the engine and nodded. "Been in my family for 3 generations. Not the easiest living, but it's honest work." He helped Arthur from the truck, noting how the older man moved carefully, his joints stiff from the combination of age and his time stranded in the heat. "Come on inside. First order of business is getting you cooled down and hydrated." The interior of the house was surprisingly cool compared to the furnace outside. Ben had installed thick insulation and kept the blinds drawn during the day, creating a sanctuary from the desert's extremes. He directed Arthur to the kitchen table and filled a glass with ice water from the refrigerator. "Drink this slowly," he advised, setting it before his unexpected guest. Arthur took small sips, color gradually returning to his face. "I can't thank you enough, Ben. I wasn't prepared for how quickly things can turn dangerous out here." Ben busied himself preparing a simple lunch of sandwiches and cold vegetable soup he'd made the previous day. "Dessert doesn't forgive carelessness," he commented without judgment. "Lot of folks underestimate it." He placed the food on the table and sat across from Arthur. "Now, tell me about this ceremony you're trying to reach." Arthur's eyes lit up, and he sat a little straighter. "My daughter, Catherine, is being promoted to admiral. First woman in her division to achieve the rank." The pride in his voice was unmistakable. "She's been in the Navy for nearly 30 years, specialized in naval engineering, developed some revolutionary systems for their newest vessels." Ben whistled low, impressed. "That's quite an achievement. No wonder you're determined to get there." He took a bite of his sandwich, thinking, "Main Highway North is closed because of the wildfires, but I know some back roads that could get us close enough to the coast. From there, shouldn't be hard to find someone to take you the rest of the way." "Us?" Arthur questioned, surprise evident in his tone. Ben shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Can't very well send you off on your own after what happened today. Besides, I've got nothing pressing for the next couple of days." He didn't add that the chance to drive beyond his usual routes held a particular appeal, a small taste of the freedom he'd once dreamed of as a younger man. After lunch, Ben showed Arthur to the spare bedroom. "It's not fancy, but it's clean. Rest up. Heat exhaustion's nothing to mess with. We'll head out early tomorrow morning when it's cooler." He left Arthur to settle in and stepped outside onto the porch, gazing at the vast expanse of his property. The evening brought blessed relief from the day's heat. Ben sat on his porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Arthur joined him, moving with more ease after a few hours of rest. "You've got quite a view here," the older man commented, lowering himself into the adjacent chair. "Best time of day," Ben agreed, offering Arthur a glass of iced tea. "Ranch keeps me busy from sunup to sundown most days, but I always try to catch the sunset." He took a sip from his own glass, contemplating the horizon. "Been meaning to ask, how'd you end up on this particular stretch of highway? It's not exactly on the way to Port Angeles from anywhere." Arthur chuckled softly. "GPS suggested it as a shortcut. Should have known better at my age than to trust technology over common sense." He studied Ben's profile for a moment. "Have you always been a rancher?" Ben's expression shifted subtly, a fleeting glimpse of something wistful crossing his features. "Born into it. Family legacy and all that. But no, it wasn't my first choice." He fell silent for a moment, watching a hawk circle lazily in the distance. "Always wanted to be a long-haul trucker, believe it or not. Something about the open road, different places, different faces every day." "What held you back?" Arthur asked gently. Ben gestured vaguely toward the surrounding property. "Parents got older, Dad's health failed pretty suddenly when I was in my 20s. Someone had to keep things going." He said it matter-of-factly, without resentment. Made my peace with it long ago. Still get to drive the feed truck and make supply runs. Not quite the same as crossing the country, but it'll do. Arthur nodded thoughtfully. Life has a way of rerouting our planned journeys. Sometimes the detours become the destination. They sat in companionable silence as darkness gradually claimed the landscape, the first stars emerging in the clear desert sky. Dawn broke with the promise of another scorching day. Ben was already up, loading supplies into his truck when Arthur emerged from the house, looking rested and determined. "Got us some food and plenty of water," Ben explained, securing a cooler in the truck bed. "Road might be rough in spots, and I'd rather not count on finding services along the way." They set off as the sun crested the eastern horizon, the truck's tires crunching over the gravel driveway before finding purchase on the main road. Ben drove confidently, his hands relaxed on the wheel despite the challenging terrain. He navigated through a network of back roads and lesser-known routes, some barely more than tire tracks through the scrubland. "How do you know these roads so well?" Arthur asked after they'd been driving for nearly 2 hours, the landscape gradually shifting from arid desert to slightly more vegetated terrain. Ben gestured to a distant ridge. "Used to come out this way with my grandfather. He showed me every trail and shortcut within 100 miles of the ranch. Said knowledge like that could save your life someday." He adjusted the truck's course to avoid a particularly deep rut. "Plus, I make feed deliveries to some of the more remote ranches. You learn the land when your livelihood depends on it." As they continued westward, Arthur shared more about his daughter. Catherine always had a mechanical mind, even as a child. Instead of dolls, she wanted toolkits. Drove her mother crazy, coming home covered in grease and full of ideas about how to improve the family car. He laughed at the memory. By high school, she was rebuilding engines for fun. The Navy recognized her talent right away. "What kind of engineering does she specialize in?" Ben asked, genuinely interested. "Propulsion systems, primarily," Arthur replied. "She helped develop a more efficient engine design that's being implemented across the fleet. Can't tell you the details, most of it's classified, but she's saved the Navy millions in fuel costs and reduced their environmental impact considerably." Ben nodded appreciatively. Sounds like someone who found exactly what they were meant to do. By midday, they had made significant progress. The landscape had transformed, becoming greener and more lush as they approached the coastal regions. Ben pulled over at a small roadside rest area to stretch their legs and eat a quick lunch from the supplies he'd packed. "We should reach the outskirts of Port Angeles by late afternoon," he said, studying a paper map spread across the hood of his truck. "From there, it's about 30 minutes to the shipyard." He traced the route with his finger, frowning slightly at a section. "This stretch here might be tricky. Military area. Might need to show some ID." Arthur smiled mysteriously. "I don't think that will be a problem." He pulled out a small leather case from his pocket and flipped it open to reveal an official-looking identification card with Navy insignia. "Retired captain. Served 30 years myself before moving to administration." Ben raised his eyebrows, impressed. Military family through and through, then. "Indeed," Arthur confirmed with a nod. "Though Catherine surpassed me years ago in rank and accomplishment. Couldn't be prouder." They continued their journey, the truck's engine humming steadily as the terrain became increasingly coastal. Salt-tinged air drifted through the open windows, a welcome change from the dry heat of the desert. As they approached a checkpoint some 15 miles from their destination, Ben noticed a patrol boat paralleling their route along a nearby inlet. "Looks like we've got company," he commented, nodding toward the water. The sleek naval vessel was clearly keeping pace with them, its presence deliberate rather than coincidental. Arthur reached for a small radio in his bag that Ben hadn't noticed before. He spoke into it briefly, his tone shifting to one of formal authority. The patrol boat immediately altered course, moving ahead of them and then turning toward a small dock up ahead. "Slight change of plans," Arthur said, tucking the radio away. "We're getting an escort the rest of the way." He caught Ben's surprised expression and smiled. "Benefits of knowing the Admiral." When they reached the dock, 2 uniformed officers were waiting. They saluted Arthur crisply and introduced themselves as Lieutenant Commander Wilson and Lieutenant Ramirez. "Captain Hayes, we've been instructed to provide escort to the shipyard," Wilson stated formally. "Admiral Hayes was concerned when you didn't arrive as scheduled. As you can see, I had some vehicle trouble," Arthur explained, gesturing to Ben's truck. "Mr. Carter here was kind enough to come to my rescue and drive me all this way. I'd like him to accompany me to the shipyard if that's possible." The officers exchanged glances before Ramirez nodded. "Of course, sir. We'll need to issue a temporary access pass, but that can be arranged." She turned to Ben with newfound respect. "Please follow our vehicle, Mr. Carter. We'll lead you through the security checkpoints." Ben found himself at the center of unexpected attention as they proceeded toward the naval facility. The officers had radioed ahead, and by the time they arrived at the main gate, everything had been arranged for their entry. Ben's weathered pickup looked distinctly out of place among the military vehicles and polished staff cars, but no one seemed to mind. They were led to an impressive building overlooking the water, where a woman in full dress uniform waited on the steps. Admiral Catherine Hayes was immediately recognizable as Arthur's daughter. They shared the same piercing blue eyes and dignified bearing. She embraced her father warmly before turning to Ben. "Mr. Carter," she said, extending her hand, "I understand I have you to thank for ensuring my father's safe arrival. The Navy appreciates resourcefulness and reliability. You've demonstrated both." Ben shook her hand, feeling somewhat out of his element, but appreciating her directness. "Just did what anyone would do, Admiral. Your father's good company on a long drive." The Admiral smiled, a warm expression that softened her official demeanor. "Nevertheless, your assistance means a great deal to me personally. I'd like to invite you to attend tomorrow's ceremony as our honored guest." Before Ben could respond, Arthur interjected, "Catherine, you should know that Ben is quite an exceptional driver. Navigated some challenging terrain with remarkable skill. Reminded me of some of our best transport operators." Admiral Hayes raised an eyebrow, studying Ben with new interest. "Is that so? Do you have experience with larger vehicles, Mr. Carter?" Ben shrugged modestly. "Drive a feed truck regularly. Used to handle some semi-trailers for cattle transport when we ran more livestock. Nothing special." "Don't let his modesty fool you," Arthur added. "He handled those back roads like he was born to it, and he mentioned earlier that he once dreamed of being a long-haul trucker." The Admiral exchanged a look with one of her aides, who nodded subtly. "Mr. Carter, after the ceremony tomorrow, I'd like to discuss something with you, a civilian contractor position for specialized transport operations. We occasionally need reliable drivers who know how to navigate difficult terrain without drawing attention. Nothing dangerous, just discreet." Ben blinked, surprised by the unexpected turn of events. "I'd be happy to discuss it, Admiral, though I've got responsibilities back at the ranch." "Of course," she nodded. "For now, let's get you both settled. I imagine it's been a long day on the road." As they followed Admiral Hayes into the building, Ben caught Arthur's eye. The older man gave him a subtle wink and a satisfied smile. What had begun as a simple act of kindness on a desert highway had somehow led Ben to the threshold of an opportunity he never could have anticipated, a chance to drive beyond the boundaries of his everyday life while still honoring his commitment to the ranch. The ceremony the following day was impressive, formal and steeped in naval tradition. Ben watched from a reserved seat as Arthur proudly pinned the new insignia on his daughter's uniform, both of them standing straight and tall in a moment years in the making. When Admiral Hayes acknowledged him in her speech as a citizen who exemplifies the values of service and integrity the Navy holds dear, Ben felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the coastal humidity. Later, as he prepared for the drive back to his ranch, with promises to return for a more detailed discussion of the contractor position, Ben reflected on the strange paths life could take. Sometimes it seemed the detours really did become the destination. As he pulled onto the highway, the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of amber and violet. The open road stretched ahead, familiar yet carrying the weight of something new, possibility. He tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, lost in thought. Maybe this wasn't just a side trip. Maybe this was the beginning of something bigger. Thank you for listening to this story. If you like it, please do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story of Narrative Whispers.